Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today we have a special guest with us, David Warner Mathisen. David, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Well, thanks so much for having me on Esoteric Thoughts, Esoteric, and I am very pleased to be here and share with your listeners some of what I've been researching for the past over a decade now. I'm from California on the west coast of North America here, and for the past dozen years or so, I've been exploring the connections between the world's ancient myths and the stars, and the evidence, overwhelming evidence, it turns out, that the world's ancient wisdom embodied in these myths that are given to all the different cultures of the world are sharing a common system, a common foundation, one foundation around the world of esoteric metaphor, celestial metaphor. They are based on celestial metaphor, and that runs from the myths of ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, the different civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia, including Sumer and Babylon, the Akkadian civilizations, the stories in the Bible that we'll talk about a little bit, the myths of ancient Greece, the myths of the other parts of Europe, such as, the Celtic stories, but also the far north, the Norse myths, the myths of Africa, different cultures of Africa, different peoples of Africa, of Australia, the Americas, all the way across the Pacific, the peoples of the different islands of the Pacific, the islands that are scattered all the way from what we call New Zealand or Aotearoa, all the way to Hawaii and Easter Island, and the myths of ancient China, ancient Japan, Asia, other parts of Asia. So it's a common system around the world, and it's not something I was specifically looking for. I was always fascinated by the myths. When I was young, I loved the myths, and I was always fascinated by the stars. And I was in the US Army for a time. I went to the military academy, and I had an opportunity to come back and teach at the military academy. And all that time, or most of that time, I became a pretty strict literalist Christian during my time in the Army. I had a kind of a general Christian upbringing, but I became much more severe about it in adulthood, really, early adulthood. And so I was not looking for evidence that the Bible was based on the stars, although I did love all the myths. Like I said, I got to go back and teach at West Point, had the opportunity to teach the Odyssey of ancient Greece, which I loved since I was a child. And it wasn't until I encountered some books that point out some of the connections between the myths and the stars. Well, I was always fascinated by the myths, and I was fascinated by the stars. I said, whoa, I've got to learn more about this. But I was very resistant to any suggestion that the Bible stories might be based on the stars. But the more I really became pretty obsessed with learning, seeing these connections. It was a book called Hamlets Mill that really got me started. It was published in 1969. It's referenced in books by Graham Hancock and others. And they really talk about, there seems to be some kind of an ancient system. It involves number, it involves weights and measures, it involves myth and fable, and it seems to be in ruins around the globe, and they point out evidence, and I was fascinated by that. But anytime they talked about the Bible stories being part of that, I was very resistant to that. But I really became obsessed with finding out. They point out the evidence that it's there, but they didn't really decipher. They would just kind of hint at things, because I don't think they really deciphered it, but I became obsessed with deciphering it because I love the myths and the stars. And I could see some of the patterns that they were alluding to. And then eventually, I saw so much evidence that the Bible was following the same system that I had to make a choice as to whether I would, continue to believe that the Bible is literal. And the evidence is just overwhelming that the Bible is based on this same system, which connects all the different cultures of the world. It's a mystery how that came about, and we could talk about different theories about that. But anyway, that I started writing about that in about 2009. I started really researching it around 2008 or 9, I think. And my first book was published in 2011. And since then, I've written several others. In my first book, I was still taking the Bible literally, but I was writing about the connections to other myths and the stars. It was my second book is when I really started to, in between that first and second book, I had to really wrestle with this evidence. And I realized that the evidence is overwhelming that the Bible is also part of this same system, which is obviously a major paradigm shift, a life-changing shift of perspective, because a lot of my identity was tied up in taking the Bible literally. But as I'll say, maybe as we go along, I believe that you don't lose any of the truth and the beauty that's in these ancient stories that attracted me, that attracts people, men and women around the world, to these ancient stories and what they have to teach us, these profound truths. You don't lose any of that by the understanding that they're esoteric in nature. In fact, I would argue the part that you lose is the exclusivity part, which is the part that causes all the problems in the first place, the part that says, well, these are true and nobody else is true, which is problematic and has led to untold suffering, as we know, around the world. So for the past dozen years or so, I've been exploring this, and the evidence is simply overwhelming, and I think it's quite beautiful in that it connects all the peoples of the world. So I don't know if that's a good enough background, but it covers the things that you were asking. But thank you so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure to meet you and share some time to talk about these things.
Thank you, David. Can you take us through some real examples of the connection between the biblical text and astrotheology?
Yes. I prepared a little visuals because, when I say the world's ancient myths are based on the stars, sometimes I see people kind of, oh, yep, that sounds interesting. That sounds about right, or that makes sense. What are you talking about? What does that actually mean? What I'm asserting, what I've found, and as I said, I'm not the first person to talk about this. There have been others down through the centuries who have argued that the stories, the characters, and the events in the Bible are based on celestial metaphor, in that specific characters, I'm talking Moses or Samson or David and Bathsheba, are associated with specific constellations, and we can see how the story comes from the heavens, the heavenly cycles, and the specific constellations. There's a whole language where specific constellations have different associations and connotations and characteristics that are shared around the world, in fact. So I'll show you a few examples of what I mean. Really, the evidence is so overwhelming. I could go on and on and on with example after example, but I just chose a few here. So I'm going to share my screen, if I can do that here, and go over here to this presentation that I've prepared for us. Let me know, can you see it? My screen? It looks like
Yes, I can see the screen. Yes.
Great. Okay, so here we are, just a few examples. But first, I want to mention how this ties us together with cultures around the world. For instance, the story of a baby being placed in an ark or in a basket or in some type of a box and floated into the river or into the waters is found in cultures around the world. This is a story from ancient India, the Mahabharata or the Mahabharata. It's very, very well known in India, even to this day. And it's a fantastic epic. In fact, it's longer. I mentioned the Odyssey. The Mahabharata has been called the longest poem ever written. It's longer than the Odyssey, longer than the Iliad, longer than the Odyssey and the Iliad combined. In fact, I believe it's as long as, if you combine the Odyssey and the Iliad and multiply by 7.2, which is an interesting number that comes up a lot, you get the number of lines that are in the Mahabharata. And it's full of adventure. It's full of plot twists. It's full of amazing story after story, sacred myths. And in one of those myths, there's a young woman named Kunti, and she becomes the mother of these 5 heroes, the Pandavas. But she gets a mantra, which if she says the mantra, she can call any divinity that she has in mind. And she says, well, I'll test it out. She's told, and that divinity will come and give her a child or make her have a child. And so she said, well, I'll just test it out. I'm not ready to have a child yet, but I just want to see if it works. And she thinks of the sun god, Surya, and says the mantra, and the god appears and he says, you called me, and now you're ready to have a child. She says, oh, no, I'm not ready to have a child. I'm still a virgin, and I'm not married. And the sun god says, well, I'm sorry, you called me, and the mantra is for you to have a child. And so now that's going to happen. But don't worry, you will remain a virgin. And so she conceives and has a child, and she puts the child into the river in a little floating box or ark, which is a pattern that we see around the world. It's not just in, it's very familiar from the Bible for people who know the Bible. I've got some others here. This is, unfortunately, I have to get the picture of me and you out of the way. Let me move that. Let's see if I can hide that. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, we'll go back. There's that story. This is from ancient Mesopotamia. There was a king called Sargon. That's the way we say his name. It's a combination of 2 words in ancient Sumerian, I believe. But he lived in like 2400 BC, very, very ancient. And there are remnants from many centuries later of stories about his life. We think he was probably a historical king, but this is actually a tablet that says his birth story. But this was written many centuries after historians believe that he actually lived. But this is from ancient Mesopotamia, and this is the actual tablet. And part of the words that you see right there, if I can't read the ancient cuneiform, but if we could, it would say on this tablet itself, my mother was a high priestess. This is supposedly Sargon speaking. This is from about the 7th century BC. My mother was a high priestess. My father, I knew not. My high priestess mother conceived me. In secret, she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen, she sealed my lid. The word bitumen, if we lived in Canada, they do a lot of mining of bitumen and getting the oil out of bitumen. It's kind of but it's the word that we in English get, the word pitch, from bitumen. You can hear the similarities of the words. And so this is a story that we see around the world. The baby being put into the ark, or the baby being put in a basket of rushes sealed with pitch. We see it in ancient Japan. There's a baby named Hiruko, who is the son of a god and a goddess, and they put him in a reed raft and sent him off into the ocean because he's born without any bones. It's there's a whole story in the ancient Kojiki of ancient Japan. And even baby Maui in the Pacific is cast into the sea foam by his mother and father. Sometimes it's his mother, sometimes it's his father. There's different variations, but we see it around the world. Oh, in ancient Greece, we see baby Perseus and his mother, they get put into a box and sent off into the ocean and end up on an island. But it's a pattern that we see over and over. And of course, We see it in Exodus chapter 2, the very familiar story of baby Moses. The woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch. There's this very similar pattern around the world, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. The flags, the marsh grasses, the river reeds and grasses. So why do we see this pattern around the world? Because they're based on the stars, specific constellations. And there's a quotation that I like very much by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. He lived from the 1880s through 1963, where he says, "The sacred scriptures of the world are 1,000 times more precious as myths than as alleged history." He says, don't get hung up in, if I say this isn't a historical story, it's a celestial metaphor. It's a metaphor. Somebody might immediately say, oh, are you telling me that they're not true? The Bible's not true? No, I'm saying it's not alleged history. It's not literal history. That doesn't mean it is not true in that it is depicting some profound truths for our understanding esoterically, but not literally and historically. All those stories of a baby being put into the water, they could have all happened historically, or some literalists might say, well, only one happened historically and all the other ones are copies somehow around the world. I would argue that they are esoteric metaphor based on this worldwide ancient system that shows up in the myths around the world on every inhabited continent and island, and that they're more precious when we understand them that way than when we try and force them into being history, because that can actually invert their message. I try and illustrate that with one of my examples. Here's an example that I'll dive in and show how one particular story, I could talk about the ark and the bulrushes and show you where that is in the stars, but it's a little trickier to see right at first when you may be unfamiliar with these concepts. This story, it's a very familiar Bible story, I believe shows it pretty clearly and pretty vividly. And what's interesting is the paintings down through the centuries. This one is from Salvatore Rosa. You can see when he lived in the 1600s. This was painted in the 1600s. The art conventions down through the centuries preserve aspects of the celestial, preserve hints of the celestial scene that the story is based on. So it's helpful to see the picture, and then I'll talk about it. Of course, this is from Genesis chapter 28. This is the famous story of Jacob. He's out in the wilderness. He has had a traumatic break with his family over the incident of Jacob and Esau, and he's headed up to Haran to meet with his uncle, but he's all by himself and he's in the wilderness, and it's time to get some sleep. Night is falling. He lies down with his head on a rock, as it says in Genesis 28. You can see the artwork down in the lower left corner. He's on a rock, and then he has this vision. He's granted a vision of the heavens and a ladder that ascends with its top all the way up to heaven, and its base is on the earth, and there are angels ascending and descending. And it's not shown in this particular illustration, but the text itself says he also sees at the top of the ladder the Almighty, who pronounces a blessing to Jacob. And Jacob is astonished when he has this vision. And this painting, I just want to call attention. This is not proof that the Bible is based on the stars, because it's a painting done in the 1600s, but it will help us. It will help this concept be accessible when I bring in the stars. If you look at Jacob, he's got a distinctive posture. He's got his arm flung over his head, one arm flung over his head. He's got kind of a I don't know, a cloak, something that's draped over him like a blanket. It almost looks like he's wearing a kind of a dress type thing because it's his blanket, I think, that he's kind of pushed off as he's sleeping there, tossing and turning, having this vision. And then the ladder stretches up and we see angels going up, angels coming down. And then look at the clouds and look at the shape of the clouds and that brilliant light. There's kind of a widening point where the light is the brightest and the gap in the clouds is the widest, and the light is shining through, and then it's kind of paralleling. It's almost like there's a parallel ladder going up through the clouds next to the ladder the artist has envisioned there. And off to the right, we have a kind of a little mountain or hill with a little kind of cave feature at the bottom, and there's some scraggly trees and some broken trees. And now, keeping that in mind, with the position of Jacob, the position of the ladder, the position of the clouds, the position of the hill, those scraggly trees on the hill, let's go to the night sky and the stars. And this particular part of the night sky where we see the glorious Milky Way rising up from the earth, stretching up into the heavens. This is the beautiful Milky Way. If you get to a clear and a dark sky, I hope you've had an opportunity to see the Milky Way. And this is actually the brightest and the widest part of the Milky Way right here. This is the galaxy that we're in. That's what scientists and astronomers tell us. We're in the Milky Way. And so when it's like we're situated within the Milky Way galaxy, which is like a gigantic spinning pinwheel, or you could think of it like a fried egg, a gigantic fried egg, and we're in the fried egg. And as we look towards the center of that fried egg, the yolk, that's what we're looking at down there at the bottom, that brightest, widest part. Astronomers tell us that is the galactic center, the galactic core. But if you look at that and I'll label, there's the Milky Way, it stretches all the way. We're looking towards the south, and this is a online planetarium called Stellarium. It's free, it's open source, so people can add code to it. It's available at stellarium.org. You just download it, and it's a wonderful planetarium app. And I've positioned us in the northern hemisphere looking towards the south. So east is to our left because we're looking south, and west is to our right. And at a particular time of year, mainly the summer months for us in the northern hemisphere, is when this part of the sky is really dominating at night, when we're looking towards that part of the Milky Way. Now, as we get towards winter, we're looking towards the outer edge of the fried egg, so to speak, more at night, as we interact with the sun in our annual cycle. But not to get too much into all the math of it, let's see how this could relate to our image of Jacob's ladder, the story of Jacob's ladder, stretching from the earth with its top in the heavens. And here we have a constellation. So that brightest part of the Milky Way is located always in between these two constellations. The stars that make up these constellations are on either side of the Milky Way. We have the constellation Sagittarius. I've just outlined it right there. And then on the other side of the Milky Way, coming out of the brightest part, we have the constellation Scorpio. And those are the two constellations that the sun and the planets do go through. They go along this path. That's why they are considered part of the zodiac, the ecliptic path that the sun and the moon and the planets travel through as part of, the solar system that we're all in, goes through these constellations. And so at a certain time of the year, the sun will be rising in Sagittarius. A certain time of the year, it'll be rising in Scorpio. But that brightest part, down at the bottom of it, as we're in the northern hemisphere looking south, we'll see Sagittarius and Scorpio. And just look at the outline of Sagittarius, and we'll see how that artist from the 1600s has incorporated some aspects of Sagittarius. It's got some distinctive features. One is a big bow, like a bow and arrow. Sagittarius, the name of the constellation, means the archer or the arrower. Actually, it's from a Latin word for an arrow. But there's a plume on top of the head, and that could be envisioned as the arm flung over the head. And we see that in artwork, even ancient artwork around the world. But they're down there at the base of the ladder. Now, above them, there are these two glorious birds, constellations that look like birds, flying in the Milky Way. They're always positioned in this part of the Milky Way. The constellations are at the top Cygnus, the swan, and then below Cygnus, we see Aquila, the eagle. And they're above Sagittarius and Scorpio, flying through the Milky Way. But one looks like it's flying upwards, Aquila does, from our perspective in the Northern Hemisphere. And one looks like it's flying downwards, Cygnus does. It looks like it's flying down. It's the birds are ascending and descending along that glorious Milky Way path. And so also, if you're familiar with Cygnus, the brightest star of Cygnus is actually called Deneb, and it's at the top of that double triangle that I just sketched in. The brightest stars of Cygnus, the 1, 2, 3 corners of that triangle, and then the one kind of in the center at the base of the neck of the swan there, make kind of a double triangle, very distinctive and pretty easy to see. Those are all pretty bright stars. So when you're looking out in the night sky, that shape right there is in the Milky Way, and it's very visible. And you can even see it tonight if you can get to a clear sky and go out, even as we're talking in the month of October. But one's flying upwards, one's flying downwards. And now take a look at this painting by Salvatore Rosa from the 1600s. Look at the depiction of the outline of Sagittarius and the way that we see the artist envisioning Jacob. Now, does this mean that Jacob is necessarily associated with Sagittarius in the Bible? No, this is an artist in the 1600s, but this is very illustrative of the points that I'm trying to make. There are distinctive features associated with certain constellations. Sagittarius has these distinctive features like that plume on top, and you can see the artist has incorporated that with the arm of Jacob. And also the fact that Sagittarius is at the base of the Milky Way, that is significant in this ancient language. Sorry, my dog is making some noises. It's okay. He's sitting here with me at the trying to get comfortable. Sorry. Back to what I was talking about. There are significant like identifications with at the base of the Milky Way. What does that mean? And the whole system around the world appears to use these significant characteristics to try and get across these profound messages that it's trying to teach us. So you can see, I hope, as you're looking at it, kind of look at the kind of skirt shape on the painting of Jacob and then the skirt shape on the outline of Sagittarius. If you just kind of rotate that in your mind, you'll see that the artist is invoking the outline of Sagittarius. I would argue that the artist is doing that. And so then we have the angels that are ascending and descending, and some look like they're coming down, some look like they're going up, just like Aquila and Cygnus above Jacob as he's having this vision of this ladder that stretches into the heavens, just as the Milky Way stretches into the heavens, and it has these great constellations of Aquila and Cygnus going up and down in that brightest part of the Milky Way, or above that brightest part of the Milky Way. And then look at the way that the artist has depicted the clouds to reflect the shape of the Milky Way. And actually there's a rift in the middle of this brightest part of the Milky Way has this dark rift in it that is, the light and the dark clouds there that the artist is painting reflect what we see in the sky. And that dark path across the Milky Way becomes important in other myths we probably won't have time to get into today. And then even on the other side of the Milky Way, or of the kind of the cloudy part of the painting that looks like the Milky Way, there's a hillock or a little cliff there with some vegetation on it that I talked about. And on the other side of the Milky Way from Sagittarius, just above Scorpio, in fact, there's a very important constellation named Ophiuchus, sometimes pronounced Ophiuchus. In my dictionary, it has both pronunciations, so I guess they're both correct. I say Ophiuchus. It means the serpent holder. You can see how there's like a central body, and then on either side, look like he's holding a big serpent there. A tail on the left or east as we look at it, head on the right. But that constellation can be envisioned as many, many different things, including as a mound or a hill or a mountain. And if you remember that painting, you've got Sagittarius on one side, you got the clouds, you got the angels going up and down. And on the other side, you've got this hill with scraggly trees on top. In fact, there's some fallen trees that even look like Scorpio in that painting. If you go back in the video and take a look, you might be able to see it. Does that prove that this is based on the stars, this story? No, it's a painting. But we can see from textual evidence, actually, that the stories are based on the stars. It's just that the paintings help make it more accessible, easier for people to see. But if you notice, Ophiuchus could actually even be envisioned as a ladder. If you look at it, it's kind of got like two parallel lines and then kind of rungs going up. And at the top of the ladder in the text is the Almighty God. At the top of the ladder in the heavens, there's another constellation. This is the constellation Hercules, which actually plays the role of a very powerful deity in many, many ancient myths, including the god Zeus, who wields the thunderbolt and is the father of the hero Hercules. A lot of times this constellation is associated with a very powerful figure, the hero Hercules. He uses a club. Zeus, he wields the thunderbolt. In some of the traditions of Africa, there's a god named Shango, sometimes spelled with an X, A-N-G-O, sometimes spelled with a S-H, A-N-G-O. He is also associated with thunder and lightning, just like Zeus. He has an axe instead of a club, like Hercules has a club. So that weapon can be envisioned in different ways. But at the top of the ladder is the vision of the Almighty. And I'll show you another piece of artwork in a moment that actually does include the picture of the Almighty at the top. But look at how the ladder is above. It's actually above Scorpio. And Scorpio and Ophiuchus, if you look, Scorpio almost looks like it's about to bite the heel of Ophiuchus, right? There's the heel of one foot of Ophiuchus right there, and then there's Scorpio right directly below, as if Ophiuchus is standing on it. And if you remember Jacob, the story of Jacob, he's a twin, right? The whole reason he's out in the desert is because he had an argument, or he had a problem with his older brother. He stole his older brother's birthright. Esau went out hunting, and Jacob tricked his father into thinking that he was Esau by putting, some goat skins on his arms and getting the blessing from Jacob instead of Esau. And that's why Jacob had to leave home. Well, when they were born, you might remember that they come out, they were struggling in the womb. And when they come out of the womb, when they're born, Jacob and Esau is born first, but not by very much. And Jacob comes out, he's grasping the heel of Esau. And so down below Ophiuchus, we see Scorpio right below the heel of Ophiuchus. And so it could be that Jacob is actually more associated with Scorpio grasping the heel than with Sagittarius. But both of those constellations are at the base of the Milky Way. And you might be now thinking of some other biblical stories where there is a heel involved, such as the seed of the woman that will crush the seed of the serpent, the offspring of the serpent. One will crush the head and one will bite the heel. Same part of the heavens that's referring to. So I believe that Jacob is associated with Scorpio, probably more likely than with Sagittarius. And there are some other artists who put Jacob kind of in the posture of Scorpio. If you look over here at the kind of the angle of Scorpio, and then over here we've got, this is a engraving from the 1800s of Jacob's vision. There he is, laid out kind of at the same angle as Scorpio. And in fact, above his head, if you look above his head, there's a hill straight up from his head, just like Ophiuchus is straight up. But at the top of the ladder, here we have, the Jacob's ladder again. Again, it's between kind of these cloudy shapes, just like the cloudy Milky Way. And then there's the ladder, and the angels, some are ascending, some are descending. But at the very top, we have the vision of the Almighty. And look at the way that the artist has depicted the Almighty at the top of the ladder, with one arm reaching out and with a full beard. Those are characteristics that have to do with the constellation Hercules. Has a square-shaped head, so a lot of times figures associated with Hercules will have a big full beard, like Hercules himself, or Heracles, or Zeus has a big full beard. The god of the Bible is often depicted with a big full beard. And you can see he's kind of reaching out there, and he's not brandishing a big weapon in this engraving. Instead, he has like a cloak over his head, which that instead of being the weapon, it's now being envisioned as like a cloak over his head. And there's times in the Odyssey where Odysseus pulls his cloak over his head to hide the fact that he's weeping. Odysseus is also often associated with that constellation Hercules in the book, in the poem, the Odyssey. But also I want to just point out there's that little hill just above Jacob. The artist has incorporated these celestial aspects into the artwork, these conventions. I don't even know if the artists know what they were doing, or if they just learned in their art academies down through the centuries. These are some of the conventions that we use, but they are clearly evocative of the constellations. So this is what I mean when I say that the stories of the Bible can be shown to be based on celestial metaphor. And what are they trying to tell us? Well, I don't believe this is a story that literally happened. Some people, may disagree with me on that, but I don't believe that the message is any less if we understand it as it actually happened to Jacob, or a literal Jacob in the middle of the desert, or as this is a picture to teach us something. And the lesson is, it's a beautiful vision and a beautiful lesson. And I put a verse there from Genesis 28. When Jacob awaked out of his sleep, he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." I thought I was all alone. I was absorbed with all my problems. I was running away from my family because my older brother, understandably, is pretty upset and may want to kill me. I don't know where I'm going to end up. I'm heading off to meet my uncle and hopefully find a wife, but I'm full of uncertainty and doubt. And here I am in the middle of this situation, in the middle of the desert, all by myself with my head on a rock. And I realize the Lord is right here. I had no idea. The divine is present, and I didn't even know it. And that's a message that is true in all of our situations, wherever we are, whether or not this story is literal history, terrestrial history. I would say it's absolutely true, but I believe that it is, as with the myths of the world, these profound myths that we find around the world that are all connected in some mysterious way. It is esoteric.